Welcome to the Sports Card Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Big Ken. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on a streaming service, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You'll be notified whenever I drop any new content. Welcome. Thanks for being here. As promised, another exciting guest, someone I see at all the shows and have become friends with over the last couple of years. Welcome, Jeff, on IG at Jeffs_cards. Jeff, how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me, Ken. I'm happy to be
Thanks
here.
for coming on. Thanks for coming on and hanging out with me today.
Absolutely. Nothing I love more than talking about sports and non-sports cards.
What else would we be talking about, right?
There you go.
I think most of the people I bring on, anybody I talk on the hobby, it's almost 12 to 14 hours a day. If you're in the hobby, you're just constantly talking or looking at cards. There's always something to do about the hobby.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So let's just get started. Just tell people who's Jeff, who you are.
So yes, so I'm Jeff. I live in Brooklyn, New York. Outside of the hobby and the sort of collectibles industry, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at a university in New York City. I'm married. I'm a father. I have a 20-year-old son in college as well. And I've been collecting since probably the mid 80s. So I've been collecting for a very long time. And what probably got me, well, before I started collecting cards, I collected comics, right? So even before the mid 80s, I was, buying, reading, and collecting comics.
Yeah.
And then I fell in love in the early 80s with football, with American football, with the NFL, and became a huge New York Jets fan. So we can unpack that later about all the trauma that I've had to endure as a New York Jets fan. But I then started collecting New York Jets cards in the mid 80s, and one thing just sort of led to another, and then I started collecting all kinds of other cards as well.
So are you from New York?
So I was born in Hong Kong, but my family and I immigrated to New York, to the U.S. when I was about 3. So I was pretty much grew up in New York.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when you think back back to the 80s. It's like people really, I think comics, stamps, coins were probably more popular than cards at that time, right?
At that time,
to,
yes.
to collect. It was the boom that came, just a little bit later with the junk wax era and things like that. So was it somebody that got you involved in comics, or was it just, how'd you get involved there?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not even sure how I got into comics. I think I was like at our local delis or newsstands, and whatever change I had, right, I would sort of buy a comic and read it. English wasn't my first language, so comics also helped me to learn the English language. And I remember, with some of my buddies in elementary school, putting our whatever, money we had, right? And it wasn't a lot at the time. And we'd be so excited to just like run to the comic store, run to the newsstand and pick up the new issue of, X-Men or Spider-Man. And and from there, it just sort of flourished.
Believe it or not, I did that with music back then.
With music.
It was all about the records, right?
Yes,
the new record coming out, the record store, things like that. But
it
really just depends, right, on who your friends are, and what your likes and things like that.
Yeah. I don't know about music. I imagine music had some more like coolness factor to it, right? But with comics, it wasn't that cool, right? And so we kind of did it like on the down low, a little secretly. We would never sort of talk about it, at school, right? We would just get the comics, bring it home, read it. I put it away. And I hoard a lot of comics.
Yeah. Did you know to keep them in good condition? Like, did you, and to put them in anything to keep them from being damaged or scuffed up, things like that?
I did for some reason. Even when I was younger, and I don't know where it came from. I think part of it was that I grew up very like with very little resources. Like, we were immigrants, right? We didn't have a lot of money. Very, very like sort of blue collar folks. And so I think part of the reason I kept things in good condition was because I valued them, right? Because even though a comic was 50 cents, right? Like, to me that was a lot of money, and so I wanted to preserve it,
Yep.
in case I wanted to use it or look at it or read the comic further down the line. So I always sort of kept things in as good condition as possible, to really just to preserve it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think part of it
And
was I knew that if I damaged it, or if I lost it, I wouldn't be able to buy it as easily again, right? So I didn't have the
yeah.
resources to do so. Yeah.
Yeah. And did it turn out that years later that those comics were valuable? I mean, was there a lot of value in those comics?
That's interesting that you inquired about that, because I think there are a lot of similar stories, right? With kids who collected, and what happened to their collections from when they were younger. So I had a lot of comics that now are very valuable, right? But before I went to college, right, I needed funds to help support my tuition and living costs. So I sold a lot of it to one of our local comic stores. And in retrospect, getting the funds then to pay for my education, paid off, right? But if I was able to secure the funds some other way and kept those comics, they would be worth a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, than what I got for it at the time.
Yeah.
Um,
The ones
I've
that got away.
the ones that got away. I've since been able to reacquire some of those comics just to
Yeah.
reconnect with my childhood.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what they go for now, because
Yeah.
I've repurchased some of them.
Mhm. I would have to imagine if you're going to, like a comic show, a show that's got comic books on it,
Right.
and you're starting to identify, just like a lot of people, go and see these pop culture cards,
Yeah.
and it reminds them of either wrestling or
Right.
movies or programs they had. I mean, I'm sure the comics do the same for you.
Without a doubt, yes. And I go to
Yeah.
Comic Cons. I set up at Comic Cons as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I see a lot
Nice.
of comics. Yeah. A lot of different kinds of collectibles.
Mhm. So then came the New York Jets.
Then came the New York Jets, and I remember actually very vividly how I became a Jets fan. I don't know if you remember, Ken, but there used to be these like electric football games, like
The something arts.
the Stratomatic games, right? When you put the little football figures on a board, and the board vibrates, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes, I remember those.
I think it was called Stratomatic, and I think I was like 8 or 9. I was at a buddy's house, and he had one of those games, and he made me the Jets, right? Like I had to be on the side of the Jets, so I got all the Jets figurines, and from there on, I just kind of fell in love with the team, and have followed them really ever since.
Yeah. About how old were you? Do you think? Would you say
I was probably like 8 or 9 at the time.
8 or 9?
Yeah, so I
Wow.
was pretty young. Yeah.
Yeah. Did anybody else in the house watch football, follow football?
No, nobody even sort of knew what it was. I think.
Must have been hard to get them on the TV, right?
Yeah, I mean, luckily I was local, right? So the Jets were always on TV.
Yeah.
If I was out of network, right, I would never have seen a game. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you get to start going to the games? I mean, have you
Yeah.
been a fan to take in games over, in
Yeah,
New
I've
York?
seen plenty of games, right? But when I was younger, not really. I didn't go to my first Jets game until probably I was in my mid-20s. So I've been a fan for almost 20 years before I went to an actual game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't easy to get to for me, right? I didn't have a vehicle, right? When I was growing up, it was costly to get there. So, yeah, I mean, now I do go to games, both, football games, but also, other sports games as well. I
Yeah.
really love sports. I still love comics.
So the cards themselves, who were you collecting when you got involved in the Jets? What were the
Yeah.
cards then?
So I remember just trying to pick up cards of my favorite players from the 80s, right? And, guys like Al Toon, Ken O'Brien, Wesley Walker. But because I was buying those cards at, various hobby shops in New York, I was also exposed to other players and other sports. So, back at that time, 86 Topps football was the main set, right? And Like Jerry Rice was in that, Steve Young was in that, so I would purchase some of those cards as well. A few years later, like in 1989, right? Like that was the year where like 89 Score was released, 89 Tops, right? Barry Sanders was in that, Troy Aikman, Derek Thomas, like a lot of the goats, right?
Yeah.
And in the other sports, right? I wish I had bought more like 86 Fleer Jordans, right? That's exactly what I started collecting. I wasn't as into basketball at that time, but I was aware of it. Like I probably had seen like many 86 Fleer packs and boxes like at my hobby shop. Probably should have bought those all up at the time, but hindsight is always 2020, right?
So were you just buying cards? Were you ripping wax? What was
I ripped a little bit. I mostly just bought singles because I was chasing like the New York Jets guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just buy those
Yeah.
individually. I didn't open a lot of packs.
And I have to imagine too, the way you took care of your comics, you probably took care of those cards just as
Yes.
well.
So I did. Yes, I got the the 9-page, not 9-page, the 9. What are they called? The sheets. The 9 card.
In the binder.
The binder.
Like
yeah, out of all in binders.
Yeah.
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 I had the sheets, and that's what I put them in, and I would look at them pretty regularly, when I was in high school, and I was collecting even like throughout college, so not as heavily, but I would still go to our local card shops. I went away for college, so there were a couple local card shops there in the early '90s, and would still try to like put together like my Jets PC.
Yeah.
But then I started dabbling in other sports as well, and other teams and other players.
Yeah. So you were just basically just collecting certain players.
Yes.
Along the way.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like nowadays you see a lot of people. I mean, they're ripping open boxes, right? So they're trying to save. If you're someone who's collecting and you want to save all the cards, you're saving all the teams. And if it's you're selling some to buy some. But I think like a lot of people, back in the 80s and 90s, they were like you, where they were focused just on certain players. Like I'm opening these packs just to get Michael Jordan, and I don't care about any of the other cards, right? And you see the old videos of people opening up and just throwing the cards, just keeping who they were looking for.
Right. Yeah, and you also had a lot of like set collectors back in the day as well. People trying to put together, like the base set from Tops, right? And that was always a chase too.
Yeah.
And then in 1989, things really changed because that's when Upper Deck released, its first seminal sort of like baseball product, right? With the Griffey in it. So that became like, from what my memory, like the first time somebody was chasing something, right? When they would open packs or boxes, they were chasing the 89 Griffey card.
Yeah. The only card everybody was looking for.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And who made out a lot of these, the LCSs, because nobody wanted all the other cards. They were taking them for almost for free, right?
Yeah. Yes, I remember those days.
So you're in the hobby now.
Yes.
Just talk a little bit about your lane in the hobby. I see you at almost all the shows. I see you probably buying as much as you're selling, or maybe even more than you're selling over there. So just talk a little bit about, kind of your lane in the hobby, what you do in the hobby now.
Yeah. So it's interesting to reflect on that and to like think about how I got to the point that I'm at now. So right now, I primarily buy, sell, trade, and collect like autograph cards. That wasn't something that was really available, right, in the 80s and early 90s. It wasn't until like the late 90s that the whole, pack inserted autographs were in the products, right? But right now, I mostly collect and buy and sell autographs. And what I personally PC are like autograph cards of players or celebrities that are like considered significant, like societally, right? Like folks that have like made a mark, right, on the sport or like in the world, right? The names that even non-sports fans might recognize. So like I love like buying Jackie Robinson autos, right? Or Michael Jordan autos, Pele, Muhammad Ali, the GOATs.
Yep.
And I feel similarly for cards that are non-sports cards, right? Like buying celebrity autographs of celebrities that have like made a mark, right, in the field, in their specific industry, right?
Mm.
So that's what I mostly collect. Um, I also like to buy and sell some of that stuff too when the opportunities arise, right? If there's a opportunity to like sell some of my PC to acquire a larger PC card.
Mm. So I know you do a lot of pop culture.
I
You
do,
know,
yes.
I see that in there. So just talk to me a little bit about um, how well that's like it, and I want to just pick your brain a little bit because
Yeah.
I know I love pop culture, and
Mm-hmm.
I just talked a little bit about on my last episode that a lot of times, and I see people too. People will go to shows and they'll say there's certain cards I'm looking for at the show. Like
Right,
I have a plan, but then all of a sudden they'll see this pop culture card and that plan just went out the window, right?
right.
Because it triggered a memory, an emotion, whatever it was, and it's almost like I've got to own that card. So over the years,
Right.
I've tried different pop culture cards, and I've noticed some have sold so much better than others.
Yeah.
So just talk to me a little bit, maybe about the psychology of the pop culture
Sure.
cards in your case, and how well they sell.
Yeah. So there is a like astronomically high market for some of the pop culture stuff. Both cards that I sell, but obviously other folks sell them as well. Again, I particularly focus on autographs, and I feel like for me and for a lot of folks, having an autograph, especially an on-card autograph of someone, whether it's an athlete or a celebrity, it brings them a little bit closer, right, to that player, to that sport, to that moment, to that franchise. And I think at heart, that's what collecting is about, right? It's bringing you closer to the game or the athlete or that show or that movie that you love, right?
Mm.
So I think similarly, with pop culture cards, um, it helps people to feel more connected, right? To that particular TV show or movie that they loved growing up. Um, I cannot tell you how many people will buy a card of a celebrity because when they were younger they had a crush on that person, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it's heartwarming to hear grown men talking about their crush on Jessica Alba when they were 13, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I
yeah.
think it helps them to sort of relive some of those times where um, it was probably rife with all kinds of challenges, but there was also like an innocence to it, right?
Yep.
uh, so I think that's one of the reasons why people buy pop culture cards, right? It helps them to again connect with parts of their past, parts of their
Mhm.
childhood, parts of their history. Most people who buy pop culture cards, they're not buying it to flip, right? So that's the one difference that I see between folks who buy pop culture cards and folks who buy sports cards. There are a lot of folks, as you know, who buy sports cards now because they can flip it and make a quick buck off of it. You don't see that as much with pop culture stuff. Most of the folks who are buying it because they
Mhm.
want to hold it or they want to collect it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think too, and this is kind of my theory, it opens up uh like a lane for people who come to the card show with the collector, with the basketball collector or the football collector, and it's like, okay, I'll go with you to the show, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I like this, like maybe this could be my lane. Maybe if I'm
Right.
going to collect a card, maybe it's going to be Taylor Swift, or it's
Right.
going to be Britney Spears, or something along those lines. I think it kind of opens up a lane to other people in the hobby who maybe don't watch sports or have no interest in collecting sports cards, but now there's this whole other group of cards for them to collect.
For sure. Yeah. I think it expands the, collector base, right? Because,
Yep.
um, someone who might come to a car show traditionally to buy sports, they may bring their kid, right? Or, their wife or their girlfriend, right? And the kid or the wife or the girlfriend sees something, right, that might speak to them in a different way than like what sports might do for your traditional sports collector. Yeah, I definitely think it expands the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. No, I listen to a lot of content, and over the
Mhm.
last 6, 8 months, I've heard people saying that, you know, the future, right, is in these pop culture cards. Like they feel like it's about to blow up. Now, I know a lot of them blew up like during the pandemic and after the pandemic, and especially with like, the TV shows like the Sopranos or Game of
Right.
Thrones and all these other cards like that. Do you see the market, like the state of the hobby with pop culture? Do you see that kind of getting bigger down the road, staying the same? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I don't have that foresight, right? I never really have.
Yeah.
I think when people lean into what they're passionate about, right, and they see that you're passionate about it, it just helps things to blow up in general, right?
Hmm.
That being said, I also think it's important to um, to be like discerning about what you buy, right? Like don't buy pop culture cards just because you think it's going to blow up, right? Like
Yeah.
buy things, that you love, but with the caveat that you buy like the best version of what you love, right? And that's based on like scarcity and rarity, right? Um,
Mhm.
and like the appeal of the card as well, right? I think that's really important. Um, Pop culture is not going away, right? It's always part of like popular culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's always going to speak to folks in a unique way.
Mhm. And you never know what's gonna happen, right?
You never know,
So
right?
here I was doing a lot of the pop culture, from the 2011. I bought a whole maybe 6 or 8 hobby boxes of the
Mhm.
2011 American Pie
Right.
last year and
Hmm.
pulled a number of those cards out and graded them.
Yeah.
And they were stagnant for a while, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they just be like people just started buying these cards, and then the
Right.
Taylor Swift cards that were in there
Yes.
were just like because of Travis Kelce and the
Right.
NFL, it was just incredible. So
Yep.
you never know, like
You never know.
one thing is going to happen, and then it's going to
Right.
blow right up.
You
Yeah,
never know. Like sometimes there's an obscure actor or actress, right, in a product, and then they do something else, right? That and then they blow up, and then that product becomes really hot.
yeah,
Um, yeah, like one of the cards that I'm thinking of right now is Cillian Murphy, who just won the Oscar, right, for Oppenheimer,
yep,
right? He had his first autograph in a movie. That was a good movie, but not a lot of people maybe necessarily recognize that he was in it. He was in Batman Begins, right,
okay,
in
yep,
the 90s, and it was a phenomenal movie. But he wasn't very well known back then. Um, but it's really his only like on card autograph, right? Now that he's won an Oscar, everybody's chasing that card.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Some of the cards that I'll say I'm getting back, they're coming back from PSA now. I mean, with the Olympics coming, right? The
right.
Simone Biles, right?
Yes.
She had the Olympic card, so I bought a whole bunch of them, some off that I thought were gradable off the grading, and they're coming
Hmm.
back now. So just like when the Olympics are coming, right? Just
Right.
hoping that you know
That'll right.
maybe this card that nobody's been buying for 4 years or whatever, now all of a sudden it may become popular, like that
Yeah, of
type of thing.
course. Yeah, man. We know that like what happens in the world, right, like has an impact on the card market, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce or the Olympics, right?
yeah,
The other thing that I think is important about pop culture that I've seen is that a lot of folks when they come across the pop culture cards, they would say things like, "Oh, I didn't know that there was a product of this show or that there was an autograph of this actor, or actress, or musician,"
yeah,
right? So they're sort of like learning along the way, and they're oftentimes surprised to see something that it is a licensed product, right, from that show or movie, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think
I
that'll
I, I mean it
yeah,
literally happened to me at Christmas time.
uh
At
huh,
Christmas time, now I'm a Hunger Games, a huge
yeah,
Hunger Games,
right,
all the movies.
yep,
And back at Christmas time, I was reading something on Facebook, and somebody put a card up,
mm-hmm.
Jennifer Lawrence as Katniss, right? And it was an
Yes.
autographed card, and I'm like, wow. So I took a deep dive. I went right down the rabbit hole trying to
Uh-huh.
figure out where this came from, and lo and behold, that there were cards that Walmart discovered from, you
Yes.
know, they were from 2012 that they were going to release, they were going to send out with these special, you know, with these new movies that are coming, that the new
Right.
movie that just came out.
Hmm.
So, you know, I ended up getting half. There's
Yep.
10 of these on card autos. I ended up getting half of them.
Uh-huh.
And I've been searching, you know, high and low for the other five to complete the sets.
Right.
Before I read that on Facebook, I had no idea that existed, and I
Right.
had no idea that I needed this more than I needed anything else, right?
Yeah.
But
Do
yeah,
you
I
have the
mean, this
Jennifer
is,
Lawrence?
I do not have the Jennifer
That's the
Lawrence.
big one.
No.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
big one.
Um,
Uh,
yeah, that's a
but yeah,
braille.
I mean, but it's exciting. It gives me something, you know, I think, and like you said, the rarity of it,
Right.
you know, sometimes when you know something's rare and then you start chasing it, I think that that becomes more exciting
Yes.
than anything else, trying to either find a card or complete a set or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of these products and cards, you know, in the non-sports world, were not as like heavily promoted, right? You know, like Upper Deck or Tops did, right, with some of their, you know, their mainstream products, right? So again, a lot of folks didn't even know that there was an autograph set, right, from the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
That's how obscure it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody I asked, they're like, what? Hunger Games?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Autograph cards?
Yes, and it's Jennifer Lawrence's only autograph card.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So, state of the hobby. What do you think? I mean, we were down, we went way
Yeah.
up, we came down,
Right.
we're bouncing around. What's your thoughts?
I think the hobby's in a very, very good place. You know, the values of certain cards are not as high as what they were, but the interest is still there, right? There's so much interest in the hobby. And it's really just, it's transcended just like your typical, you know, everyday collector. I mean, you have like, you know, celebrities and musicians and athletes collecting now, right?
Yep.
And I think that creates a lot of exposure for the industry and for the hobby. So yeah, I think that the hobby's in a really good place. I think folks who are expecting, you know, the values of cards to return back to 2021 are probably going to be disappointed, right? But I don't think the values are the only barometer of what the state of the hobby is, right? I think for me, the barometer and the gauge is like how many people are buying and selling cards, how many people are attending sports card shows, how many transactions are happening, you know, on eBay or Veriswap, you know, how many people are bidding in all the auctions that are going on, you know, with Golden and PWCC and Alt. And it seems like there's tremendous interest.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the shows too. I mean, you go to a lot of the big shows.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you some questions about that later.
Yeah.
But I'm watching the videos from these shows. I get to a lot of the shows. I haven't traveled. I haven't been to the real big ones. I mean, obviously the national I go to every
Right.
year, but even these, you know, medium, you know, shows that I go to are, I mean, they're very well traveled. I mean, there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of sales going on.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot of foot traffic at a lot of these shows.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and clearly there's even more going on like in the online world, right?
And what's your thoughts? I'm not exposure, but thoughts with the repackers that are there, you know, that are coming to the
Yeah.
shows.
Look, I think, you know, anything that elevates the hobby is good for the hobby, right? And so I believe that the repacking business, you know, if it's done, you know, with integrity and ethically, I think it's good for the hobby, right? I think it gives collectors and buyers more options. You know, like one doesn't necessarily have to just drop, you know, money on, you know, the newest case of Flawless Basketball, right? They don't have to buy into a break of Flawless Basketball. They can buy into a repack, you know, opportunity, right? It just gives collectors more options. I think it also helps dealers because, you know, the repackers are paying pretty strong for cards that they want to put into their repack product. It makes it a little bit harder for dealers to buy, right? Because I think there are so many folks that are aware of like what the repackers are paying for different cards, and so it makes it harder for someone like me and other dealers to like walk around a show and buy, or even buy like for people walking up, right? Because the people who are walking up, they have a sense now what they can get, for their cards.
Yeah, yeah. And I know it's so interesting that, even when I go to a show now,
Hmm.
I went to not the Westchester show that was just this past weekend, but the one before that.
Yep.
So I showed up on a Friday, right? Paid the extra money for the earlier to walk around.
Uh,
And I talked about there was a couple cards I couldn't even buy at 100%,
right.
like they're like, no, I'm gonna wait for the repackers are coming, see
Right.
me someday. If I still have this card, you can get it. which
Yeah.
which before that, on a Friday, if someone wanting to pay 90 to 100%,
Right.
you're gonna sell that as fast as you can. I mean,
Without a
that's
doubt.
almost a home run.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it definitely makes it more difficult,
Right.
to buy cards, especially at shows. But
Yeah. I mean,
you know,
frankly, like there are times when I'm even less inclined to sell like a 90% now, right? Because I wonder in my head whether or not like a repacker could pay me more.
yeah,
Um, I'm not as attached to selling to repackers because again, I don't do this for a living, right? So I don't have to like squeeze out every nickel and dime from a sale. So I can
mhm,
sell for a little bit less. But for folks who do it for a living, like I get it, right?
yeah,
Like you want to maximize your profit. I get it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Every little bit helps, right? And
A little bit helps.
especially if this is your full-time gig, right?
Exactly. Right. Every
Yeah,
little bit
yeah.
helps if you're doing this for a living, right?
I mean, I always say, and anyone like me, I'm blessed that I do this, and I
Mhm.
don't do this because I need the income. I do it
Right.
because I make the income, and it supports my PC and
Your hobby.
everything I do. It
Yeah.
supports my hobby, right?
Yeah.
So it's you know,
And that's mostly why I do it as well, right? Because it helps me to acquire things that I want for my PC, for my collection.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I mean, I'm never going to complain if I can make, some extra funds on the side, right? That's never going to
yeah,
hurt. Yeah.
yeah. And it's a family out there, right? I mean, the hobby family out there, the people you surround yourself with in the
Yes.
hobby.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of my closest friends are in the hobby.
Yeah,
We travel to a lot of these shows together. We dine together, right? We hang out together, and so
yeah,
you get to know some folks really well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you grade cards?
I do, but not at a rate that I think a lot of other folks do.
Mhm.
Um, I mostly grade like on site. So I will grade at times like at the Dallas show because Beckett's there grading on site. I'll grade at like Burbank or the National because they're again PSAs, they're on site. I don't have I don't know, the bandwidth or the time to, um, clean every card and to, package it up and to print out the, the form. It's just a
Yeah,
lot of work. I have a full-time job, right? And so
yeah.
I just don't have the space mentally and the time to
Mhm.
do as much grading as I think some folks do.
So when you talk about grading at the show, are you having them grade it there and hand it back to you at the
Exactly.
show,
Yeah.
or
Before the show
yeah?
ends. Yeah. Yeah. That would have to
So
deal
th
with.
so these have to be bigger cards. I mean, because you're paying a premium at that
Yes.
point to have, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. For
and it
sure. Yeah. The
and it
bigger
and is
cards.
it PC cards or cards that you're going to be selling?
It's both. It's both.
Yeah,
But they're higher value cards, right? I think it has to be to justify the cost
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah,
grading on site. Yeah.
yeah,
Although at the Dallas show, Beckett will grade, for a relatively, reasonable price, right? Like you can do raw card review at Dallas for like $25, right? You can,
mhm,
submit a card for grading and have it returned at the end of the show for, between $125, $150, which is not that much for end of show service.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And do you find that they're pretty fair with the grading?
Frankly, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with the actual grading process. There's so much. It seems to me like there's so much subjectivity,
Yeah,
right? Um, and it seems like there's inconsistency. Um, I don't know like what the workaround to that is, right? Like if it needs to become more like automated or AI needs to get involved in some way. But it seems like when the human element is there, there's a lot of variability, right? I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure you've heard stories as well, about a card being a PSA 8, it gets cracked out of the case, right? And it gets resubmitted and it becomes a 9, right? Or I mean, that's why people buy certain cards, because they think that it might get bumped, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
I'll tell you, I have an order that just got shipped out of PSA today.
Uh-huh.
And when I sent that in, I make notes on all the cards. And
Right.
I know this one card that I had that I looked at it and there was clearly edge issues and corner issues.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I I'm not going to sell the card, so I'm just going to send it to get graded
Yeah.
because I just want it encased,
Sure.
right? And it's gonna sit here in the office. And I thought, and I really went back and forth, like maybe I should just send it to SGC
Mhm.
instead because it may be a little bit cheaper. But I had an order going to PSA. I said I'll just send it, and I'm thinking to myself, it's probably a 7
Right.
at best.
Hmm.
And I looked at the sheet this morning. It said your grades are ready,
Yep.
and other cards that I'm like 100% this thing is going to gem,
Right.
and I got a whole bunch of 9s coming back. But this
Yep.
card that I'm like, I wasn't even going to send this card is coming
Uh-huh.
back a 10. I
Right.
have
Right.
no idea. I have no
Exactly.
idea. I can't wait for it to come back and I can take some pictures of it just to show people like there's
Right.
no way this card should have been a 10.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know,
Exactly.
it's just it's incredible like how. And even now I just sent another order out yesterday. I don't know, maybe it's like being a Jets fan, right? Maybe I just want to punish myself, but I busted out a whole bunch of 9s. I wiped them down and I
Yeah.
just sent them back to see
Right.
everybody else says they coming back 10s. I'm like, well, maybe 2 times is the charm, right? They're gonna
Yeah.
come back 10s then.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it reflects well on the grading industry, right? That, cards can be cracked out, resubmitted, and get a different grade, right? But we
Yeah,
all know that happens, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah. I think the other thing that's frustrating and challenging for collectors and buyers is that, like, the same grade, right, for a card can mean so many different things, like, right? Like, there's just a lot of room for what a 10 means, a lot of room for like what a 9 means. And so
yeah.
I'm not sure if you've ever heard about, that old sort of like saying to buy the card, not the grade.
Yep.
Right. And so I still encourage people to try to do that, especially if they can see the card like in hand. Right. And I think that's why in the vintage market, like, eye appeal is so important. Right. Like, sometimes even more so than the actual grade.
Yeah, that's a whole other world than the vintage and the
Yeah.
grading, and because nobody really care. I mean, I don't think many people care what the grade is
Mhm.
on some of those cards, maybe just to compare it value wise, but everybody's about the eye appeal on the
Right.
card. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's interesting with this grading. That's why I asked you if you graded and how you felt about it, because I know a lot of people are you know if you're on the other end where like me, you're getting a card that should have never gemmed and you're getting 10s,
Uh-huh.
you're excited. But
Right.
if I send 20 cards in and I'm getting 4 or 5 10s, and I just think it's random which cards are 10s.
It feels random sometimes, especially with
Yeah,
some of the modern stuff, right? It feels
yeah,
really random.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
The other
yeah.
concern that I have about the grading industry is that it seems like some of the grading companies are like associated or affiliated with folks who are selling the cards, right? So I think that that's a concern that a lot of folks have, myself included, right? Like, the grading companies and the people selling the cards are essentially, partners,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Um, I won't name any grading companies or any sellers, but
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
concern.
But they may be a little bit more lenient for them than John Q. Public, right?
You,
Yeah,
you would imagine, right? It would just be like a understandable sort of tendency, right? Because
yeah, yeah,
one is serving the other.
yeah. And if you look at the amount of cards, all these grading companies,
Mhm.
like I think PSA is doing like 1 million cards a month, right? Something
Right.
like that. It's just
Yeah.
incredible that all these graded cards. Oh, so how many people are in the hobby? It just
Right.
goes to show you, and and,
Yeah. It's
and you're like,
unbelievable.
I don't. You're a big part of the hobby, and you're like, I don't even grade, right?
Right. I don't grade all that much. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Shows. So I
So
know you do all the big shows. So
yeah.
one of my burning questions is, and I ask people all the time, and I
Mhm.
did an episode with Crosstown Cardboard on this,
Yeah.
like money wise, does it make sense, the traveling, the like when you get out to these big shows now, you're a big presence, right? You're making your presence at these shows, but financially, does it really make sense? Financially, are you really doing well, or is it just more being a part of the hobby? Like, at
Right.
what point do you say, okay, like, this isn't part of my expenses, and that's
Uh-huh.
not part of my expenses, and we're just going to narrow it down to here?
Right. Well, first of all, I don't do all the shows, right? I wish I could do more, right? The traveling can be challenging, especially having a full-time job. So during like the academic semesters, I don't travel as much. And when I do, it's usually I'm heading out on a Friday night, getting back on a Sunday night, and it can be quite intense, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that's something to sort of keep in mind as well, is that there's like labor and work put into getting to the shows, traveling to the shows, setting up, getting back, because time is a valuable resource as well, right?
Mhm.
So I try to keep that in mind. Um, I actually love going to shows and setting up at shows for a lot of different reasons. One is I'm not buying and selling all that much online, right? Like in full transparency, like during the work week, I barely do anything with cards, right? Like I'm not online on Instagram buying, selling, making deals. Um, so most of my transactions, whether it's buying from my PC or selling to someone or buying to sell, happens in person at shows. So that's the main reason why I like to go to shows. I also like the social aspects of the shows, right? I like having the opportunities to interact with people. Like I'm a people person. I'm pretty extroverted. I like connecting with the folks that I'm on the circuit with, right? My good friends. I like hanging out with them. I like shooting the shit with friends. Talking about sports and non-sports. So I enjoy that part of it. Um, and I say all that because I think there's more for me about going to shows than just like the profit margin, right? Like the return on investment for me is not just about the money, right? Even though that's important and that helps, right, when it is financially profitable, but I get more out of it than just the money. Again, I don't do this for a living. It's not my full-time job, and so I feel privileged to be able to like partake in all the other non-financial aspects of going to the show, right?
Mhm.
That being said, most of the shows are profitable for me. Um, even when I'm traveling to Hawaii, for example, right? I did the Hawaii PopCon the last couple of years, and that's a pretty exorbitant sort of cost to travel to Hawaii to stay there, right? Um, but I was able to buy and sell enough, where it was profitable.
Yeah.
Uh, if I made the same number of sales, right, at the same volume and rate at a local show, right, I'd obviously be profiting more because I wouldn't be incurring all the expenses. Um, but at the same time, I get to go to Hawaii, right, like in the middle of January with my wife, right, and if I
I was just thinking, I'm like, my wife never been to a card show,
right,
but if I told her I was doing one in Hawaii, she
yeah,
would be there.
exactly, and that's why I also like doing Burbank, because I like going out to the West Coast. I have friends and family in the West Coast, so I can build in some other things to the travel, right? That's not just
Mhm.
about the cards.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I think about it.
So you mentioned Burbank. I
Mm.
know Dallas,
Right.
Chicago.
Yep.
Uh, what shows do you? Uh, I mean, what are your favorite shows? You must have your favorite shows, or the shows you really look forward to, versus your most successful shows, or
Right.
the shows you do well at. I mean,
Yeah. So I do love the Burbank show and the show in Hawaii because of the location, right?
yeah, yeah,
Burbank is a very well attended show. You've got buyers and sellers from all over the country, but also abroad, from Asia, right? Coming to California and also to Hawaii. There were a lot of like international buyers and sellers in Hawaii as well.
yep,
But I love those shows because I love the location, right? The most profitable show for me is probably Dallas and the National, right? Um, Dallas is such a great selling show. Like all the major buyers are down there. All the repackers are down there. They're always buying, and so if you go to Dallas, with the right inventory that you bought at the right percentage, you're going to make money.
yep.
Um, it's also super convenient, right? Like the hotel is connected to the venue where the show is, and there's constant trade nights. It's like 24/7, card deals going on. So constant opportunities to buy and sell. I also like the local shows too, like the New York City, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut shows, because
Yeah.
while they're smaller, I think there's not as much competition to buy, right? And so there's more opportunities for me to buy from folks because the big boys, right? All the repackers aren't at these local shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's easier to get to for me, right, as well.
Mhm.
So it's less time intensive for me
Yep.
to do a show in New Jersey or to do the
Yeah.
White Plains show that we were at this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How was that show?
it was average.
Yeah.
It wasn't like phenomenal in the way that Dallas or Burbank is, um, but there was nonetheless a great turnout. I mean, Sunday was you were there on Sunday, right?
I was there Sunday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys
Yeah.
Sunday. I mean, there was a huge crowd there. A lot of the folks were there because they wanted to meet the athletes who were signing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I was expected to show up and see sad faces at the tables and get
right.
all these great deals, and
Uh-huh.
and all of a sudden the place got packed
Yeah,
within
yeah.
minutes, and I'm like,
Right.
oh, yeah,
It was very crowded. And,
yeah,
and we made a lot of deals. We bought a lot. We sold a lot.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's definitely worthwhile. And for me, it's so close.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned the national. Do you spend the week out there for the national?
Yeah. So I usually do. I usually arrive, on like Tuesday or Wednesday and stay till Sunday.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. The last 3 or 4 nationals I've set up at.
mhm,
Before that, I took a 10-year hiatus from setting up at the national. In fact, there was a period where I really stopped collecting and buying and selling. There was like a 10 or 11-year period where I took a break. I still had all my cards, and that turned out to be profitable. When the boom hit in 2020 and 2021,
Did this have to do with your son, like the age of your son and doing
it
things
did.
with him?
It
Yeah,
did. Yeah. I mean, it
yeah,
was.
yeah,
I think I stopped when my son was born in 2004.
yeah.
And I didn't get back into it until maybe like 10 or 11 years later.
Mhm,
Um, and interestingly, the way I got back into it was because my son got into Pokemon and started both collecting the Pokemon cards, but also like competing in tournaments. And so that got my juices flowing again, like seeing all the cards around, right? And seeing like people buying and selling Pokemon. So I got back into doing some more buying and selling and going to more shows. And then in 2020, it just sort of everything blew up, right? And I went back into my like storage unit, like dug out all of my cards from like the late 90s and early 2000s, and I did really well with all of that.
Dear diary, jackpot.
Jackpot. It really was a jackpot. And unlike some folks, I sold most of it, right? So
Yeah,
I had a sense that was like going to be the peak. And it was a lot of like high end stuff because that's the kind of
mhm,
stuff that I bought in the late 90s and early 2000s.
yeah.
Yeah, I was
And
really
that
much into autographs. So I bought a lot of autographs at the time.
it's funny you should mention the Pokemon because my son,
Mm-hmm.
when he was young, got involved during that period of time in the late 80s, or actually it was in the 90s, um, the late 90s. And I went out and I bought all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he wanted. I want Pokemon, and the kids were all like trading these cards and
Right.
stuff. And I didn't really quite understand it, but
Uh-huh.
I bought a whole bunch of cards, packs of cards for him. I would pick them up on the way home, stop at the store, and and then all of a sudden one day they were just doing something else. And I
Right.
went into his room and the cards were all there and there were
Mhm.
still a bunch of sealed packs. And I'm like, what is going on? I spent all
Yep.
this money. So I took all the cards and the packs and I went and I just put it with my hockey because I
Uh-huh.
collected hockey cards back,
Yeah.
in the 80s and 90s. I put them all with them. And it was kind of a similar thing when I got back into the hobby, right? It was like Pokemon was this huge thing.
Yep.
And not only did I have all these cards to sell, but I had all these sealed packs, right?
Right.
Which were even more valuable because the mystery of, is there a Charizard in there or whatever, right? So
Right.
yeah, that catapulted me, like, it filled up the hobby fund quick.
Yes. Yes. Because Pokemon blew up as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Um,
probably, and I mean, I didn't spend much on those cards back then, but I probably
Right.
50x'd on the money when,
Of course, yeah.
sold them all those years later. And I thought to myself, oh, I made a mistake. I should have held on to that longer. But I think I did perfect, because I think everybody like me had those cards in a closet, in a
Yeah.
shoebox, had it in something, because it just seems like the market all of a sudden got flooded with the
Right.
Pokemon cards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Pokemon is still huge. I mean, the
Yeah.
Pokemon market is so vast, and it cuts across like so many demographics.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I mean, when I do Comic Con, that's like my best seller, like Pokemon cards.
I just did the Mohegan show
Yeah.
here in Connecticut,
Uh-huh.
and it's half sports, half Pokemon there.
Right.
And I would tell you, and I talked about recapping it on the podcast, saying I think there were more Pokemon people there and they really get into it. I mean,
Yeah.
they were coming in full dress and
Yes. Right.
dressed up and stuff. Yeah, it was yeah, and it was interesting because it was a younger crowd, right?
Right.
So you would think that it was, the kids who played with it back at that time
Uh,
would be an older crowd, but it's not. It's a much younger crowd that's very
yeah.
involved in the Pokemon. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Pokemon has done a great job of marketing to, to the current generation of collectors. They're really good
Yeah.
at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Now, were you involved in the competition with your son, or did you just travel
yeah.
with him?
So I wasn't initially, but as he got older and he needed me to be around less, right? When, he was at the competitions, I just got bored. So I started competing myself, right? And I got really into it as well. And, I qualified for the world championships twice, in Pokemon. He
Wow.
qualified like every year that he played for like 7, 8, 9 years. So yeah, I got into the competing side of it as well.
Nice.
It was
How
fun. It was
far did
fun.
you take it? Did you win any championships?
Never won any championships. Just qualified for worlds. For the world
Yeah.
championship a couple of years. And
Yeah.
that was fun.
And would a world championship look like the national, or similar to that, or?
Yeah, the Pokemon World Championships is huge. We were just there, in Japan this past summer, to support some of our friends and to obviously visit Japan. But it's a global event, like thousands and thousands of competitors and spectators, and the pricing is like astronomical now. It's huge sums of money to be won. But more importantly, what's most valuable about like finishing in the top 4, top 8 are the cards you get, right? So there's, in the Pokemon community, these cards that are called trophy cards.
Yeah.
And there's only so many that are given out every year, and they command like huge sums of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that the card the wrestler was wearing? Wasn't that one of his, wearing around his neck?
No,
Jake
that's
Paul,
Jake
or?
Paul. No, he
Yeah.
he wears the first edition Charizard card.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All
But
right.
Steve Aoki, owns some of the trophy cards
Oh,
as
okay.
yeah. And he
Mm.
also owns the Pokemon Illustrator card, which is like a sort of a trophy card.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, best advice you got in the hobby?
Best advice I got in the hobby. Condition matters. Yeah. Condition
Of,
matters.
of
So
us or the cards?
the cards or the collectible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, to do what you can to preserve the condition of a card.
Yeah.
And to buy, cards that are in as good condition as possible. Again, like within the range of what you can afford.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And what advice do you find yourself giving to attendees at shows?
it depends on what their angle is, right? If they're a collector and they're purely a collector, I would like really advise them to just buy what they love, right? Like to feel good about owning something, cherishing something, regardless of what the value is. Um, for better or for worse, there are very few like pure collectors now. Like a lot of collectors are also investors, also dealers, right? And so, with that in mind, I would encourage folks to buy what they love, but to also, again, like buy the best version of what they love, right? in terms of like condition, scarcity, rarity, significance. Um, for dealers and investors, well, I don't know if dealers and investors are the same thing or if they go hand in hand. I think for dealers, an investor, you've got to think like both short term and long term, right? Like there are cards that a lot of us know long term won't retain too much value, but in the short term, we can buy it and flip it to make a profit, right? But those kinds of cards are different than cards that we feel comfortable like holding, for 10, 20 years and trusting that, with the passage of time, like these cards will retain its value and possibly also increase in value, like based on the significance of the card, right? And the player that's represented on the card and the scarcity of the card. So I think you have to think about like what your approach is, right? Are you a collector? Are you an investor? Are you a dealer? Or are you all three? It's probably not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? Nowadays, you don't get very many just pure collect, or I don't, right? I mean, you talked about the pop culture being
Yeah.
for collectors, right?
Mhm.
But when it comes to the sports cards, I can't tell you how many times I get people saying, well, I mean, I can't buy it from you for that because I can only get this when I try to resell it. I'm
Exactly
like,
right.
well, wait a minute. I own the card right now. So,
Right. Yeah, yeah. That's another reason why I really love like the non-sports pop culture world is because a lot of folks are buying because they're collectors, right? And so they don't necessarily feel like they have to haggle for every cent.
yeah.
It's a little easier to sort of get what you want, right? As long as you're fair and reasonable with the pricing to begin with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And do you find I bring on I've had Brad from Outlaws Sports Cards on a number of times, and he's always talking about 80%, 80%. I mean, everything sells at 80%. Do you find that same thing? I mean, when you're thinking you're putting cards out that you're going to sell, are
mhm.
you automatically thinking I'm only going to get 80% of the comp on that card? Or, I mean, what is your thought on
Uh,
that as you're
it,
putting?
it, it depends on what it is, right? There are cards that I probably couldn't even give away, right? Much less get 80% value for, right? Um, and then there are cards that are just like so rare, right? They're not cards that are transacted a lot, right? That I don't think you can even go by comps sometimes, right? Like how many times is this Jennifer Lawrence card going to sell, right?
Yeah.
Or are you
Yep.
going to go by the comp, from 6 years ago when it sold for $200, right? Probably not, right? Because that card rarely comes up for sale, and
Yep.
and you just sort of know and you can intuit that when it is made publicly available, that it'll be significantly more than what the last sale was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it really depends on the cards.
Yeah.
I think for cards that have a lot of transactions, it's probably hard to try to get more than 80 to 85%, right? Like cards that, like Prism, for example, right? Like there's so much of it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very liquid
Yeah.
sort of product.
And
Like
and if there's a room full of those cards, people are just going to go from dealer to dealer and say,
exactly.
and they're just going to pay the lowest they can get.
Of course, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you think with your pop culture being a little bit more the rarity and scarcity, it's kind of um, easier for you to get better margins on those cards just because there's not a room full of those cards?
I mean, it has been better and easier for me to get better margins. I've been able to buy some of that stuff at the margins at the percentage that I want them to be at, and then sell them for close to comps if there are comps.
Yeah.
It's definitely more challenging with sports.
Mm. And do you only sell at shows? Do you have other outlets that you move the cards at, or is it
I
just at?
mostly sell at shows. I have a eBay account. I have been a member of eBay since like 1997 or something. Uh, so I have sold on eBay, but not nearly as much as some folks.
Yep.
Every once in a while, I'll post some stuff on Instagram and maybe get some sales there. But I mostly buy and sell at shows in person.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
kind of old school that way.
Well, I mean, again, if you're doing it purely as from a hobby position, right, and you're working a full-time job, I
Right.
mean, I run a business, but I run a lot from my office, so
Okay.
I can if I sell something, I can easily package it up and drop it at the post office on my way out or things like that.
Right.
But it's just because I'm in a position to do that. But when I was working full time and I was gone all day, I would have never been able to,
It's tough.
you know, keep up on that stuff. Yeah,
right. I joke with the person that I do the Dallas show with. Dallas is a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday show. That I'm not even like really there at the show until like Friday at 4 or something. Like, because I'm still working my other job on Thursday and Friday. So
yeah, you have other people holding down the table for you.
I do. Yeah, I usually set up at some of the biggest shows with folks that I trust. Right.
Yeah. And that's what I'm hoping for this year, to get to a Dallas show and to a Burbank show, just to get out there and experience it. And
right. Yeah. Dallas is relatively easy. It's convenient, right? Like direct flights there all the time. The show is right at the hotel.
Yeah. From New York, you get a direct flight.
Yeah.
Connecticut,
New York, right.
not so much.
Okay. Are you going to be set up at the National this year?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. We're still trying.
And I like, the first time I set up, I was like, okay, I'm gonna be there Wednesday, but Saturday I'm leaving. I'm going like that. And then after that first time, I was like, no way, I have to be there the whole time. So the last few years, I show up on Tuesday, and then I leave and go home on Monday.
Okay. Yeah, it's nonstop, right? Every day.
So, And you know what? It's like Tuesday is like the calm before the storm, right? I mean, for me, setup is Wednesday morning, but I get there Tuesday, I'm there, I get the lay of the land, I relax, and then it's full go on Wednesday through Sunday, right? And then when it ends on Sunday, it's nice just to like decompress and, take a night and then go home the next day.
Exactly. Yeah. We're planning on setting up the National, but we haven't secured a table yet, believe it or not.
Getting harder and harder, right?
Harder and harder. Yeah. Hopefully we'll get that all settled.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people and just message me,
right?
Almost weekly, like, do you know anybody has space available out there? Yeah,
it's tough.
Yeah, and it's and they had the people, they were right next to you, right? The people from the National were right next to you. And I asked somebody another table, I said, what's the booth for the National? And they're like, I don't know, maybe they're selling tables. I'm like, if they were selling tables, the line would be out the door and down the street. They're not selling tables.
They weren't. They were there just to answer questions and to like encourage attendees to think about going to the National. Actually checked in with that woman, and apparently I'm still in the system and still have some like priority status from when I was like officially on the list back in the 90s.
So, wow.
Hopefully for Chicago, they can get me in.
Wow. Yeah. That's good. And I know they tell you every year you have to reapply. Like for someone like me that I don't have a booth, right? Or a table. So I have to, every year I reapply, and I just think it's probably a waste of time. Like no one's ever going to call me or tell me I have a booth, but I'm doing my due diligence every year. And filling out the application. But I'm lucky enough to know somebody who gives me a couple of showcase spaces to set up.
That's how we've gotten in the last few years. But apparently once you officially lock in a booth, you're like in the system forever. You're like grandfathered in. So I used to do them in the 90s. In fact, the first National that I ever did was in Cleveland at the IX Center back in 1996 or 7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. You must have some serious seniority.
Well, but then I also took this long break. And so I think I lost some of that seniority because I stopped doing them for a while. Yeah.
You probably thought to yourself, I should have just held on to that table, right?
That's what the woman at the booth told me the other day, who I was speaking with. I should have just like paid for it anyway, even if I wasn't planning on doing it.
Yeah.
But I had so many other things going on at the time, with graduate school and family. And so just lost sight of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens, through life gets in the way, right?
Exactly.
I mean, everyone you talk to, there's nobody really I've talked to who started when they were a kid and has kept going. It's usually you get married, you have kids, and
life happens,
career, things like that. But we all make our way back.
We all find our way back. You try to get out, it pulls you right back in, right?
Yeah. All right, Jeff, I appreciate you coming on. This has been great.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
talking about this stuff. So
If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
yeah, on Instagram, Jeff's_cards.
Good, good.
Yeah,
Or at any show,
or
because
any of the
wherever I
streaming
set up,
shows.
unless it's a real local show here in Connecticut, I always see you. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Where your next one? Is it Chantilly? When is Chantilly? Is it this
So
weekend?
I can't make Chantilly. I might do the Fishtown show in Philly
Yeah,
in mid-April.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't make the Chantilly show again because of work.
Mm.
The next big show that I'll be doing for sure will be Dallas in May.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
but I might do
It's
some
funny.
local shows. Mhm.
It's funny. They said, I've been trying to get into the Philly show.
Yeah,
So same thing. Every year I go fill out the thing to get put on a
uh-huh.
wait list
Right.
over there. And this year it was like they improved it, and they're like, "All right, we need your hobby references."
Oh my goodness, I
I'm
can be
like,
a
"What
reference.
is going on?"
I'll be a reference for you.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
guys that run the Philly show, the same guys that run, I think, the White Plains show, right? They do all those shows.
yeah. And they run the national.
They run the national now, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So they have Chantilly, White Plains,
right.
Hofstra,
Yep. Philly
Philly.
national.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So once you get in with them, hopefully you're good for all
Yeah,
the.
that's what they say. You just, I mean, I'm on waiting lists for everywhere,
Oh boy.
right? I mean, I'm happy that I know people that are setting up at these.
Yeah.
I've made these contacts, and people are like, "Yeah, if you want to come, just let me know. I'll get you
Right.
some space." Except when it comes to the national,
The
right?
national stuff. Yeah.
That's almost impossible for
Right.
people to give that space up.
Yep.
But, all
All
right,
right.
man. Appreciate you
Of
being
course.
on.
Fun. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you.
All
I
right.
want to thank everyone for tuning in. And if you like what you hear, please definitely subscribe. And most importantly, tell a friend and spread the word. Until next time, take care of yourselves and everyone around you. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone.